in,
Yeah.
longer to get out.
Yes.
It's still I mean, it's the end of the line. There's, several times in the 33 years I've been in Olympia, ships either coming to or leaving Olympia got stuck on sandbars between here and Tacoma because the ship pilots come here so infrequently that they didn't really remember where the shipping lanes were.
Some of the biggest ships, I've been told, have to come in at high tide or near high tide, so that also limits them time-wise. Yeah, if you're thinking about just where does one put a port, I mean, whether it's in Africa or Asia or the United States, where does one put a port? What do you want? The first thing you want is proximity to your trading partners. You want to be as close as you can to the other side, because time is really, really money for these big ships. We don't have that. You want naturally deep water. We don't have that, because dredging is expensive. You want really good intermodal transshipment abilities. We don't have that. You want a lot of flat land, because you have to store these things and move them around. We don't have that. We ain't got nothing.
Except tax subsidies.
Well, but you can keep the dinosaur alive with enough resuscitation, and that's what we're doing. From an economic point of view, it doesn't make sense. But this business of tax subsidies is just one of the nuttiest things that I've ever heard, and it's a hard thing for people to get a hold of. You might imagine, say, shoe stores. If we all three have each a shoe store, how do we compete for customers? Well, we try to keep our prices down. And that's what happens. You cut your prices, you try to build volume and get more people to buy, and you do okay. But at some point, there's a bottom point where you can't cut your prices anymore. With ports in Washington State, and I've been told that this is unique, that this is not true elsewhere in the world or in this country. With the ports here, we can just keep cutting our prices to attract it, because the taxpayers are going to be shelling out. The tax subsidies don't happen just here. The tax subsidy in Seattle is immense, and Tacoma. Those are the two real ports. We really in Puget Sound have two ports, Tacoma and Seattle. The others added together don't make up more than probably 1 or 2% of the shipping that happens in Puget Sound. There's really only two ports.
Now, a lot of the things that you mentioned that make the port less viable, such as steep sides to the terrain all around the port, and the fact that it's the end of the line, those things make it more beautiful, I would say. So what would we use this area for if we didn't have a port here?
Well, I guess I want to look ahead. How long will we have a port here regardless of what we do? All of the models of sea level rise indicate that substantially the entire Port Peninsula will be underwater at high tide in a few decades. So unless there is a plan for raising the port, for adding fill and physically raising the land, our port will cease to operate at some point in the future.
And no more dredging will help at that point.
Dredging tells you how deep the channel is for the ship. It doesn't tell you how high the land is for the trucks that bring things to the ship. The first thing that both the City of Olympia and the Port of Olympia need to do, in my opinion, is a sea level rise mitigation plan, management plan. Will a dike and seawall work as it does in Amsterdam, or will it fail as it did in New Orleans? If it will work, how much will it cost? Can we afford to dike or raise the entire Port Peninsula, or should we try to protect just the area that's from the farmers market south, that is the developed part, as opposed to the industrial part? Those questions haven't really been asked, they haven't been answered, and there's no sea level management plan in place to guide that investment. As a result, frankly. A lot of investors are afraid to invest in downtown Olympia because they know that in 30 or 50 years, if nothing is done, they're going to be seeing regular flooding of their property at high tide, at the extreme tides of the winter. So it's depressing investment in downtown already. To me, that's really the first question. Is the port going to be here much longer in any case? And there's no clear answer to that yet.
And that's not the Port District, because of course the Port District, the governmental entity, also has the lands in Tumwater. But we're speaking now of the downtown Olympia. This gets very confusing because we talk about port they use the word port as the Port District, and we use the word port for the marine terminal. That would be one of the advantages of changing the name of the Port District. We'd make it the Port of Thurston County District, the governmental entity, and then Port of Olympia would be that marine terminal down there. That's how it's known. That would be fine.
Yeah, that would be more clear.
Yeah.
Are there other uses that could be made? Supposing we did have a port in the years to come, are there any other uses that could be made of that area?
Well, what's usually mentioned is what's already been done. I mean, some of the industrial lands have already been converted. You know, where Anthony's used to be logs, and where the office building next to it used to be logs.
Something for the public.
So it could be the pure public use thing that's been mentioned is make the whole thing parks and ball fields and whatever. That would take money. That's not something the port could do on its own. General purpose government would have to buy that land and develop it for that. It could be used for office buildings, for housing, for any other use that can be made of land, which is what's happening over on East Bay, where the Children's Museum is going in, and they're planning a hotel and office buildings. That used to be industrial over there too. There were also industrial lands all along West Bay, and those industries have all shut down in the last 30 years. And they're being converted to office and housing and so forth. In the case, one case, a park. And so this is what has happened with waterfront areas in this country and around the world. There has been at least over a 50-year period this immense transition from heavy industrial and shipping use to more people-centered uses, parks, housing, offices, kind of thing. You know, the deep water shipping facilities are still there, but there used to be all the industrial production going on in those kind of places too, and that simply is not happening much anymore. And Jim may know more about this than I do, but that is the evolution that's happening. I looked at the new city parks plan, and they list all of the park and public access type facilities that are now along our waterfront on the saltwater side and in Capitol Lake, and it's absolutely astounding. I came here 35 years ago, and the only thing there at that time was Priest Point Park and maybe what we now call Marathon Park. Not sure about that. But everything else has come since then. Percival Landing wasn't there. Heritage Park wasn't there. The new West Side Park wasn't there. And on and on and on. The Port Plaza.
A little pocket park along East Bay Drive.
East Bay. All those, and they're very well laid out. I'd recommend it. Pages 30 to 36 of the draft Parks, Arts, and Recreation Plan, which is currently being considered at the next stop, I think, is the Planning Commission. It really gives a picture of that evolution that's happening other places. I mean, you can look at Vancouver, BC. You can look at Seattle, where lands have been converted. You can look at
And so that's why they're calling for a master plan for the whole peninsula that would integrate all of these different public areas and make them all work together.
Well, the port needs to have its own master plan for whatever stage of development it's at. Right now, it's got certain plans and has its master plan. My guess is that 20 years from now, that master plan might look very different. Mostly because of sea level rise, and the other big factor that people are starting to talk about finally is earthquake. because that's all a liquefaction zone down there. When we get the next really big earthquake, which we're due for sometime, that whole area liquefies and starts flowing, including a good part of downtown south of that. That hasn't been taken into account in our planning, and I think needs to be. And when you take those two factors, sea level rise and earthquake, I think we may be looking at those lands down there very differently in how they're to be used, how they're going to be zoned.
Mm-hmm. There's one purpose I can think to a public port that hasn't been mentioned, and that is just as a sign and a symbol of a very busy and important commercial center, which it might help us to look like and might be worth something to someone. But you'd want to look at the facts and figures and see if it was worth what we're actually paying.
Well, yeah, it might be worth something to someone. Is it worth $4.5 million a year to the citizens of Thurston County? That's the question.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a cost-benefit analysis. We get benefit. People mention the kind of romance of the sea. It's really a benefit to this community to see ocean-going vessels come in here. And it is. You can take the grandkids down there and they can look at logs being loaded and that kind of thing. There's some real benefit to that. The question is the benefit sufficient to justify the cost, like any other decision we make?
The amount that we pay the port and property taxes is about equal to what the county commissioners had to cut out of their budget, laying off, reducing operations at the health department by a third, reducing operations at the county parks department by more than that, reducing sheriff's deputies. There's really a question of where is the public's money best spent. Are we getting more benefit out of the port than we get out of our law enforcement agencies? Well, that's a question that the public doesn't really get a chance to address directly because of the special purpose districts. All the port commissioners do is implement the port tax that they're allowed to implement and spend the port tax plus the port revenues.
Gets to talk about what it's actually paying and whether it's worth it and whether it should be used for something else.
Well, ideally, the Port Commission ought to be sponsoring forums that deal with these issues and deal with them. I would say, as a career public policy analyst myself, they need to be broken down into bite-sized pieces. You can't just say, should we have a port district? Because it really is like a conglomerate. This is like a small conglomerate. It's an $8 million business that has basically 4 working units within it. So you have to look at those working units or even pieces of those working units. The port ought to be sponsoring that, just as the city sponsors exercises like this from time to time. The development of our comprehensive plan, the development of the parks plan, the development of a chapter in the comprehensive plan that dealt with our policing that we did years ago, and get people involved in that. That's how it ought to be done. But it could be done by the League of Women Voters or the Carnegie Group or the Chamber of Commerce or anyone. Yeah, the Green Party.
All right, and we need to do it. So I want to thank you for sharing your expertise. You've been thinking about this for many years, and I hope that the public begins to think about it too. Thank you very much for appearing, and thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next month on a new Green Issues Forum.